the 23rd. So there is a date, January the 23rd. The federal government has accepted and agreed that it would forward the bill to the National Assembly to debate and then pass it. So we're closer to getting a national minimum wage law. Now, how much that would be is what we cannot tell, Ramah, for now.
All right, then. So let's look at the flip side of this situation, though. Assuming that the unions do follow through on their threat to call a general strike in the country, how much economic damage would such industrial action cause, especially given the fact that we've got elections that are barely 5 weeks away?
Now, that is the key, Ramah. Elections less than around 5 weeks away. It just would not be cricket at all for labor unions to go on strike. It just would not make sense at all for workers to go on strike. As we speak today, the economy is struggling. I mean, the figures that came out not quite long ago, not too good in terms of GDP numbers and all the other indices you have. So, and you have a government too that is seeking re-election. So it just would not make sense for it to allow workers to go on strike. And should these workers go on strike, it would do... if these guys choose to go on strike, you know, the oil industry, for instance, will be shut down, and Nigeria may find it difficult to pump oil. So it's just something the government cannot contemplate at this time. And I think that's the reason why it has agreed that it would present that bill to the National Assembly January the 23rd. Because if it chooses not to, honestly, the repercussion would just be too much to bear for this country and this economy.
All right, one last question for you. The cost issue. So the federal government says they can afford this, but the state governments are refusing to agree to this minimum wage. It's $82 a month. A much smaller economy like Kenya, where I am right now, has a much higher minimum wage. So how is this a cost issue for the governors here? Are there other reasons that they're not willing to talk about publicly?
Well, Ramah, I mean, you heard what the lawmaker there said, that South Africa, for instance, pays 125,000 naira minimum wage. That is when you do the conversion. But, you know, what I always tell people is you just don't do the conversion that way, because what 125,000 naira would buy you in South Africa may not be, you know, 30,000 naira may buy you more than what it will get you in South Africa. So it depends. And that's why you would have a situation where, for instance, in Kenya where you are, it's possible that the national minimum wage, well, when you look at it on the basis of just figures, well, it might be higher. But in terms of the value, I mean, the minimum wage here might be more valuable. But no doubt at all that, look, the minimum wage being put on the table now is actually small, $82 per month. Now, what the state governors are saying, as we speak today, the current minimum wage in this country is just around $52. And as we speak, Ramah, quite a number of the state governments have not been able to pay. Well, what are the reasons? They will tell you allocation has actually gone down because, you know, the way the country is structured, well, federal allocation actually comes from the center, and whatever the states get will depend on what the government makes in terms of oil revenue, because that's where the bulk of government money, government revenue is coming from. So if you have a drop, for instance, in the price of petroleum product like you're having now, you have a drop in the price of crude oil, sorry, or you have the central government not making enough. So it means that what would go to the states will not be enough. And the fact is that the state governments, they have a bloated workforce. Imagine a state that has around 45,000 workers and, you know, has not been able to pay those 45,000 workers for over 6 months. And now the workers are asking for additional minimum wage. So these are part of the problems that the state governors are actually pointing out and saying, look, we cannot afford it. The state governors are saying they cannot afford it, that even at $52 minimum wage, they're owing that the figure now goes up. It just would be very difficult for them. Of course, you know, the labor unions have argued that, look, they just have to accept it. And you had the labor union president there saying that, look, it's just not enough to implement the law. I mean, to pass the law now, but right, implementing it. So we just wait and see what the government will put forward to the National Assembly as the national minimum wage. If it will ram down that 30,000 naira, that's the $82 now, down the throat of the state governors, we have to wait and see. But there's no question, Ramah, if you ask me, I think there's still trouble ahead.
Okay, and you've just given me an idea for a purchasing parity index that we should probably set up. Maybe we'll actually call it the Jollof Index. Who knows? We'll figure it out. That's Dejuban was there live in Lagos. Right then, moving on to a story outside Africa, but with ramifications on the continent. Jim Yong Kim, he's set to step down as the head of the World Bank. It's a move that has surprised many in the international DFI community. Kim will be standing down by the 1st of February before the expiry of his term in 2022. He still had another 3 years to go. Now, the Washington-based organization is one of the largest donors to developing economies. While many of its policies have proven to be pretty controversial, it's also been putting a bit of money behind enormous infrastructure projects in Asia, Africa, and Latin America too. Now, Kim's decision to quit for the private sector has been described by sources close to the bank as mostly a personal decision. Let's get the latest on this. Daniel Rangers joins us now live from Washington, D.C. with more data on this story. Daniel, is there any historical precedent for this sort of thing where a president of the World Bank walks away from the job years before his term or her term is due?
It's extremely rare, I would say. Of course, we did have the ousting of Dominic Strauss-Kahn from the IMF a few years back over some personal scandals and some personal politics there that meant that it didn't help the institution to have somebody with that level of scandal hanging around him and all those legal implications. But you know, Jim Yong Kim resigning at this point is a bit of a shocker, to be quite frank, to many in the development institutions here in Washington. Clues that might suggest why, beyond personal reasons. You know, he was brought in to really enact policies of reform to what some people perceive as an organisation that was fairly bureaucratically bloated and may have been perceived by some in Washington as a sort of pseudo-government rather than a development institution per se. So I think he tried in the first couple of years to really enact a process of leaning up and reforming and prioritizing certain areas, and he got a hell of a lot of pushback from inside the institution itself. People really rebelled against that. He adopted a more conciliatory tone and seemed to get off on a better footing. He then had a real triumph in securing funding even within the Trump administration for continuation of World Bank projects and lending. So he seemed to be on a bit of a roll. I think the clue that I'm going to point you towards is the resignation letter, in which he says, "This is the path through which I will be able to make the largest impact on major global issues like climate change and the infrastructure deficit in emerging markets." The path he's suggesting is to go into the private sector. The question is, wouldn't that be best done by continuing with a major global institution like the World Bank that is intrinsically involved in all of these things? So it raises some doubts about whether he had internal frustration about his policy agenda.
All right then. So the bank, of course, has had a very strong emphasis on renewable energy, and it shied away from fossil fuel projects for the most part, particularly coal. And in that sense, the World Bank and the Trump administration are in completely different universes. But given the Trump administration's views on coal and its very transactional view on development aid, should we expect the next World Bank president to be more closely aligned, to be more in orbit around the White House?
Well, there's a lot of turmoil that potentially could surround the next appointment. As you know, traditionally there's been this sort of gentleman's agreement between the US and Europe about Europe basically taking the position of the IMF, and then the United States taking the position of the World Bank, or having a major influence. And usually it was an American male who took on this position, as it is right now. But, you know, the resistance to that approach has been growing and growing. It just seems to be archaic in the modern age when you have a merit-based system here in the United States on the whole. Why shouldn't you have a merit-based system based on something that reflects the global community? Well, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor of the President, before he took office, he wrote an editorial in the Times of London suggesting that the World Bank should be privatized. So there is this element within the Trump administration of really wanting to sort of bang a nail in these institutions. Saying that, it's unclear whether the Trump administration really wants to have a major fight at this point within the World Bank, and whether it would be willing to push, fossil fuels again as an investment vehicle for the developing world. I suspect that they will be seeking to put forward an appointment that emphasizes the private sector above these large bureaucracies, emphasizes the need for reform, and somehow gets the support of Europe and maybe some of the developing countries. But this could be a very, very difficult, muddy fight ahead, and it could really define the future of the World Bank and whether it remains a relevant global institution.
Indeed, especially within the wider context of the fights that are going on between the United States and her allies. We'll leave it there for the time being. That's Daniel Rangers there live in Washington, D.C. Now, let's move on to Somalia, and a move there to ban the use of local currency in several regions of the country has had quite the negative effect on businesses over there. With a lack of new currency, traders are now being forced to use the American dollar as the de facto official currency, and that in turn has affected small business owners. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo filed this report from the seaside capital of Mogadishu.
This is the biggest market in Beledweyne, a strategic town in central Somalia on the border with neighboring Ethiopia. Mobile money is dominant here after the business community banned the use of the local currency. That has had a troubling effect on small business owners in most towns in central Somalia. Traders say the current banknotes in circulation is mostly fake, torn and in a poor state. Fadouma Abshir is a tea vendor in Beledweyne and says the lack of local currency has affected her business.
We prefer transacting using the Somali shilling as compared to mobile money services because we get our money in cash. Clients send the money to a wrong number, others never send it. We have a big problem dealing with mobile money payment.
Farmers too have also been affected by the ban. Farm produce harvested in this region is mostly ferried to Puntland and other central Somali towns that have also abandoned the use of cash payment.
We have a big problem with the absence of the Somali shilling. Every transaction is done using the dollar. This has affected our business and we are appealing to authorities to bring the shilling back.
The only banknotes available in the country is the 1,000 shilling, after smaller denominations stopped circulating almost 3 decades ago. Authorities have condemned the ban on the Somali currency by the business community, but are not providing any quick solutions. Finance Minister has announced Mogadishu's plans to print new currency, displaying the sample to both local and international media.
Printing money for a country that has no money is a major task. It's a major undertaking. And alone, we could not have done it. We could not dream doing it ourselves. Now we are looking for the cost of printing money, which is not a small amount. $40 million. Just to print your money, $40 million. And that we are close to getting it, securing through the IMF. And we thank them very much all the time, and the international community. We are thinking that very soon there will be currency circulated in this country that are shilling.
Somalia has one of the most active mobile money markets in the world, with telecommunication companies commanding millions of subscribers. The new currency will allow Mogadishu to challenge telecom companies and exert overall authority in the country's economy that has in the past years begun to record major improvements. Abdulaziz Billo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Right, then let's start our run through company news here in Kenya. Creditors of the fashion retailer Ghosn East Africa are set to meet later this month to consider and vote for or against options to revive the listed firm. Now, the retailer had loans of about $3.5 million maturing last year when it continued to post lower sales and larger loss. The fashion retailer's creditors include NIC Bank and UBA's Kenyan subsidiary, which it owes about $5.15 million and $964,000 respectively as of the end of December 2017. Over in South Africa, Houghton flour suppliers who supply checkers have claimed that the retailer essentially reneged on long-term contracts without warning, potentially destroying their businesses. In a letter sent to Checkers head office, companies allege that if the contracts are not renewed, there will be hundreds of jobs at stake. The Kenyan-based Africa Tech Ventures has raised over $7 million from the African Development Bank to invest in the growth of high-potential startups within sub-Saharan Africa. The equity investment is part of the Boost Africa investment program. That's a joint collaboration between the African Development Bank, the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, the EIB. And finally, Dubai plans to triple the size of its financial district, adding an area nearly the size of London's Canary Wharf. This comes despite slower growth and rising competition from neighbouring banking hubs. The expansion is dubbed DIFC 2.0. It's going to add 1.2 million square metres to the centre over several phases with a focus on fintech and innovation. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how Egyptian car owners are getting funding to convert their cars to run on natural gas. And Libya plans to take advantage of a bit more improved security in order to double its oil output. The numbers on that and plenty more coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt's Ministry of Petroleum has signed an agreement with several local banks in the country to provide loans for Egyptian nationals who want to convert their cars from running on fuel to natural gas. Now, the government is trying to encourage the use of natural gas, which the country has in abundance now, as an alternative to more expensive fuel for vehicles. Yasser Hakim has the details.
Egypt imports about 42% of its petroleum products consumption. The government subsidizes fuel at a cost that exceeds $7 billion a year, a hefty sum on the country's budget.
The strategy of the Ministry of Oil of Petroleum was planning to replace this kind of fuel diesels with the gas. And this is actually, it's very good idea because the world, actually around the world, we have like more than 17 million car worldwide actually using the gas car. And they actually is converted, actually manufacturing from the beginning for the gas engine. We have extra production for the gas. So the gas is very cheap. If you use, convert it to 100 buses from the fuel to the gas, it will save $1 million per year.
That's why the government has provided loan facilities to encourage Egyptians to convert from fuel to natural gas. The first stage will help convert 4,000 vehicles. Most of the beneficiaries so far are buses and taxi drivers.
The gas option is really good because it's cheaper. I fill the tank with 39 Egyptian pounds. If it's fuel, I will pay 135.
Gas is ideal for Egypt because of the heavy traffic all day. Gas consumption is far much less than fuel while in traffic, and so it costs less for us.
Egypt is planning to totally scrap subsidies on fuel by 2020. This will lead to sharp fuel price hikes, and natural gas can be the viable option for vehicle owners. Apart from natural gas, the government has cancelled all tariffs and taxes on eco-friendly electric cars to make it more affordable for Egyptians and to become another alternative to the fuel-driven vehicles. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's head over to Tunisia now, where the tourism revenues for the country went up to $1.36 billion following the arrival of a record 8.3 million visitors, perhaps including you, in 2018. Now, tourism in the country, of course, had been very heavily affected after the attack on a beach in Sousse that left 39 tourists dead, and a separate attack at the Bardo National Museum in Tunis that killed 21 people. A return of European visitors to the country would improve the sector, which accounts for about 8% of the country's GDP. Tunisia does expect tourist arrivals to hit 9 million for the first time in 2019. Still in the region, Libya is aiming to more than double its oil production to 2.1 million barrels a day by 2021. The war-torn state right now produces about 950,000 barrels a day of output compared to its pre-war output levels of about 1.6 million. The chair of Libya's state-owned oil company, the National Oil Corporation, however, says that this can only be achieved if security is improved throughout the country's oil fields. Libya, even with all the issues it's having at the moment, is still one of Africa's top 5 oil exporters.
The numbers we are talking about are 2.1 million barrels of oil and around 3.5 billion cubic feet of gas, and they are ambitious figures. We have other plans of developing, the refining and improving the production sectors. There is a lot going on, but all we need is some stability. Our production today is 953,000 barrels to be specific. Our production before the events of the Sharara field was 1.3 million barrels. The average production figure for 2018 was 1.107 million barrels. Those are excellent figures.
Let's move on to Zimbabwe now, where teachers are preparing to go on strike as part of efforts to push for their salaries to be paid in US dollars. Now, the lack of circulating hard currency in the economy and the devaluation really of electronic money has prompted businesses and civil servants alike to demand payment in US dollars. Now, cash shortages have plunged the financial system over there into utter disarray. It's threatening to stoke social unrest, and it's undermining President Emmerson Mnangagwa's efforts to win back foreign investors too. According to the Zimbabwe Teachers Union, its members will go on strike as spiraling inflation has left them completely unable to afford, much less buy, basic goods. Civil servant salaries accounted for 90% of the budget last year, but the government has made a pledge to cut this to 70% in 2019. Now then, let's turn to agriculture, and a leap in tech has allowed scientists to take their DNA labs quite literally out into the field so farmers can identify diseases quickly and tackle problems before the much wider crops are affected. A study using portable real-time DNA analysis devices shows that farmers can largely increase the yield of the plants they grow.
This simple device can make a big difference for cassava farmers here in East Africa. Cassava is a staple food resource, and any surplus is a blessing and shared with neighbors rather than being sold for cash. Viruses not only kill the crops but also leave people starving, so it's vital to tackle any diseases before they spread and kill all the neighboring crops. The device was tested by scientists at Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology and Dr. Laura Boyking from the University of Western Australia.
We are here collecting leaf punches from infected material to test, to do a DNA extraction and then start sequencing in the field.
The device was first deployed at Asha Mohammed's farm in 2017. Mohammed has 5 children to feed and, like many of her neighboring farmers, are keen to stabilize their yield and avoid cassava mosaic disease.
The increase of this seed will help and lift us all from minor problems such as children's school fees and food at home. Even in other crop productions, you can sell cassava and go buy amaranth and other vegetable seeds, buy fertilizer and start a vegetable garden.
Within a 9-month period, Mohammed with other farmers saw their yields leap from 0 to between 35 to 40 tons of cassava tubers per hectare.
This is the best day of my life because I spend hours and hours in a lab and I wonder if anything I'm doing actually makes a difference to anybody. And to come out here and see Asha and her farmers group have enough food to feed their families.
Boyking's research was funded by the Crawford Fund, a non-profit organization which is designed to support agricultural research in scientists in developing countries. Song Yangtian, CGTN.
Love the skin you're in is a sentiment that the authorities in Rwanda are trying to encourage among their citizens. The government over there is enforcing a ban on skin-lightening products. It's planning, in fact, to actually get rid of cosmetics that are used to lighten the skin altogether, saying that the chemicals in these controversial products are harmful to the health of the end users. Take a look.
Beauty may only be skin deep, but millions of people in Africa are putting their lives at risk to attain an interpretation of it through skin lightening, often using products containing powerful and prohibited toxins like hydroquinone and mercury.
I am very sad that these products are banned. We will just use what is locally available. But the people who made that decision need to know that these products make a woman feel beautiful.
Even with the clear dangers, many users say they should be allowed to choose for themselves.
If I don't have these products, I'm afraid I will become too dark, like I used to be. I still have a few products left, but I hate the thought of becoming darker.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame catalyzed the crackdown when he weighed in on a recent discussion on social media about the growing use of skin lighteners.
We are now putting much efforts, like educating people, going around and selling those illegal products. So you can say that we are also joining those other countries that are also in this fight of the use of those skin-lightening cosmetics.
African countries like Ghana, Kenya and South Africa also have prohibitive laws, but like Rwanda, they struggle to come between willing buyers and smugglers in the billion-dollar industry.
I'm happy to hear that those cosmetics have been banned, because so many people are using these skin-lightening products. Sometimes they have such a drastic effect on the skin. You can meet someone you know and not even recognize them. It is a good development.
The World Health Organization estimates that at least 4 in every 10 African women bleach their skin. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
It's 18:34 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Former Nissan chair Carlos Ghosn faces another 6 months behind bars. And President Trump is set to make his address, making his case for the border wall.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Emergency and medical personnel in South Africa are working around the clock to free passengers trapped under two trains that collided on Tuesday morning. At least 3 people were killed, dozens of others were injured. The trains crashed in the capital, Pretoria. They are said to have been travelling in the exact same direction and on the same track when the incident occurred. Madagascar's High Court has confirmed that the former president, Andry Rajoelina, has won the presidential election. Now, the court rejected all complaints filed over the results, saying that Rajoelina won with more than 55% of votes cast. A close contender, Mak Ravalomanana, also former president, received more than 44% of votes cast. Ravalomanana had denounced the runoff results. He alleged that massive fraud had taken place on election day and during the vote counting. Egypt have won the right to host the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations in June and July. That decision was arrived at during a Confederation of African Football Executive Committee meeting in the Senegalese capital of Dakar. The North Africans won the vote with an overwhelming 16-1 count with only one abstention. They will stage the expanded 24-team event. The initial hosts, Cameroon, was stripped of the tournament hosting rights last month over concerns about the slow pace of preparation. And finally, representatives of the opposition presidential candidate in the DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, says that they have met with the outgoing president Joseph Kabila's camp to ensure a peaceful transfer of power. Kabila's camp, however, has denied that any such meetings have occurred ever since the December 30th election. Tensions are rising in the country, though, as some in the opposition are accusing the government of trying to rig the vote. Results, remember, are yet to be announced more than a week after votes counting started. That's a run through your headlines. Quick update for you from the car world here. Former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn's lawyers say he could be behind bars for another 6 months. On Tuesday, he appeared in court for the first time since his shock arrest in Japan in November last year. The 64-year-old's lawyers say there is absolutely no reason for his detention after the executive accused of financial misconduct declared his innocence on Tuesday in a court in Tokyo. Now, the head of Ghosn's Japan-based legal team, Motonari Otsuru, added that an agreement between Ghosn and Nissan was based on the condition that any losses or gains from currency swap contracts would be Ghosn's to bear. The presiding judge, Yuichi Tada, said earlier on Tuesday that his detention was due to a flight risk and the possibility that he could conceal evidence.
The reason why we made this request for the procedure to be taken place is that we, as the lawyers representing Ghosn, believe there is no reason to detain him. The judge at the court started the hearing by stating the fact that Ghosn is under detention and explained that if they do not detain Ghosn, he might escape or conceal evidence. Given the fact that there is a trilateral agreement among Nissan, the bank and Ghosn, any losses cannot ever be linked to Nissan. Therefore, we indeed questioned and were unsatisfied that the court recognized this as a criminal case, as the prosecutors claimed it to be.
All right, then let's move on to the United States. The US President Donald Trump is set to make his case, to take his case to the people for a wall, which will cost American taxpayers about $5.7 billion along the Mexican border. Now, the head of state is expected to deliver that speech on Wednesday at about 0200 GMT from the Oval Office. A partial government shutdown has been in effect for 18 days now, after lawmakers failed to break a deadlock over the budget funding process. Now, controversy is sparked following the decision by major US TV networks to air this speech. Critics do point out that the networks did air President George W. Bush's primetime address on immigration in 2006, but they did not air one on a similar topic by President Obama back in 2014. Democrat leaders in the House and the Senate also released a joint statement later on saying the speech would be misleading, and they're also demanding airtime of a similar manner in order to counter the arguments that will be put forward by Mr. Trump. All right, then, so let's dig through this developing story. CGTN's Nathan King joins us now live from Washington, D.C. So, Nathan, this started out as a case of building what the president described as a big, beautiful wall out of precast reinforced concrete, and that was back in 2016. Since then, it's morphed into something different, a steel wall with slats. It's turned into a fence and so much more. But what does Mr. Trump really want here?
It's not clear. Look, the wall was always much more of a symbol than an actual reality. You know, it was a campaign promise by then candidate Donald Trump to show that he was tough on border security. He did actually mention the word concrete several times throughout his campaign. Journalists hauled him up on that last week. But yeah, he said, look, you can call it whatever you want to call it. Concrete, we'll make it out of steel. It can be slats as a fence. But he does believe that putting in more fencing, robust fencing along the southern border with Mexico is the way to go. Listen, you know, all immigration debate will go around whether you need more fencing or whether you need more technology or whatever. But he knows it plays very well with his base. He said, we're going to build a wall. He said, we're going to shut people out. This resonates with people outside of Washington and the debate about what works and what doesn't. And it resonates with his base. And he's been hauled up in conservative media, both on the radio and television and on social media, about perhaps wobbling on his commitment before the shutdown came into effect. And so he's doubling down. We want war has been the cry from this administration, and that's where he's going to be going tonight.
Indeed, and of course, we don't need to mention, of course, the fact that he's made these interesting allusions to that whole Game of Thrones poster. But the president does claim there's a crisis.
The wall is coming.
Yeah. Exactly, the wall is coming. So he's also made reference to this so-called crisis at the southern border with Mexico. But where's the hard data to back up anything that he's saying on that front?
Listen, you know, there are lies, damn lies and statistics, right? I think Winston Churchill said that once, one of the few right on things he said. And you know, they are using facts, which, or at least statistics, which are easily questionable. They try and raise a red flag about a record number of illegals crossing the southern border, but they're actually counting people for anyone who claims asylum or who crosses illegally as or what is deemed as illegally as a crime. They've labeled that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of potential terrorists coming from the southern border in Mexico, whereas most terrorist experts say they've never even seen a case of anyone coming through the southern border. So there are lots of different statistics, and I don't want to say facts, I want to say statistics being bandied about, and this is the main worry about this speech tonight, is that the president will use his platform as commander-in-chief and the president in a primetime address and perhaps repeat some of what most analysts say are at least stretching the truth, if not falsehoods. The real answer here is that there has been a massive upsurge of asylum seekers. Now, asylum seekers don't usually try and sneak in over a wall, or whether there's a wall or not, but declare themselves at ports of entry. They have to. They have to say, look, I'm here fleeing violence from Nicaragua, Honduras, etc., etc. And there has been a huge uptick of that. There's been an increase of families as well. But they are generally not illegals, if you like, because they are presenting themselves as asylum cases. And these too sometimes get caught up in the whole narrative of, quote, illegals as well. So if there is a crisis at the border, it's not about necessarily drugs or terrorists or illegals, but because of the problems with violence in other countries in Central and Southern America and the upsurge of asylum seekers.
Indeed. So some government operations have been shut down for the better part of 18 days now. So what effects are we likely to see on government operations if this drags on, as the president has warned that it might happen, into February or perhaps even into March?
Yeah, Ramah, I mean, it's as close as 50 meters from the White House. As I was walking in to speak to you just now, had a chat with the Secret Service guys. I was like, hey, are you getting paid? They're not getting paid. They have to turn up to work. They're protecting the president right here. But they're not getting paid. So it's that close to the president. And then you fan out across the 9 US government agencies that are at least partially shut down. And there's been questions about, for example, food stamps for the most poor Americans. The Department of Agriculture that runs that service, say they've got a month, 6 weeks or so of funds left, but if this drags on, that could happen. There was a huge outcry on Monday because this is tax season in the United States. The tax returns wouldn't be filed and tax refunds wouldn't come. Although quickly they know the White House knows the political risk of that, so they said that there would be people brought back to work to deal with these things. And you know, from parks being shut down to people not being able to get mortgages with government backing, to even people who are applying for citizenship, all this is slowing down. And the longer this goes on, the more of this you're going to see. You know, the government here in the United States, like everywhere, provides services, and they do have a little bit of wiggle room, but the longer this goes on, the funds will run out and more services will be pulled back. And then there's the workers themselves, the ones that actually have to turn up because they're considered essential workers who are not being paid until, of course, this ends. Well, they start taking 6 days, or they really don't feel their morale plummets as well. The real key date I'd watch in mind is because a lot of federal workers got paid on December the 28th, and they get paid every 2 weeks generally, is this Friday coming up. That's when their next paycheck is due. If they don't get that paycheck, expect a lot of repercussions, not just from the 800,000 federal workers that are either not working or working without pay, but also the knock-on effects in the economy as well.
All right, we'll certainly keep an eye out on that date. That's Nathan King. Potential diplomatic rift between the European Union on one hand and the United States are just coming to light. It's been revealed today that the status of the EU's delegation in Washington has been downgraded to a much lower level, and Brussels wasn't told. This is the nation-state equivalent of being ghosted. Our Europe correspondent Jack Parrock has more.
European Union officials here in Brussels say they're in contact with their US counterparts to discuss and figure out exactly what happened with this downgrading of diplomatic status. Back in 2016, Brussels managed to successfully lobby the Obama administration to regard the EU's delegation with the same diplomatic importance that it holds for national embassies. But in either October or November last year, the Trump administration downgraded the status again to that of international bodies considered of slightly lower importance. It's all been revealed now after German broadcaster Deutsche Welle found out from EU officials that the EU ambassador in Washington, David O'Sullivan, was not being invited to events someone in his position would expect it to be invited to. And then at an event commemorating the death of former President George H.W. Bush, he was called much further down the list than would have been expected. EU officials also say they weren't informed of this downgrade of diplomatic status, according to Deutsche Welle. There have been some media reports to suggest that the status has been re-upgraded, but neither the EU or the US has confirmed that to us yet. Now, why is this downgrade significant? President Trump has long been critical of the EU and openly supported the campaign for Britain to exit it. And currently the European Union is doing everything it can to prevent President Trump from imposing import tariffs on European car imports. In fact, the EU's Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, is in Washington right now trying to do that, armed with fresh figures which show the EU is over-delivering on its promise to import soybeans from the US. Everyone's keen to hear what the US State Department has to say about this downgrade, but the press office says it's not able to reply because of the government shutdown in the US over the border wall. Jack Parrock, CGTN, Brussels.
Amazon is a 25-year-old company now, and it also has another feather in its cap. It's eclipsed Microsoft to become the world's most valuable listed company. The online giant was worth $797 billion, when the US stock market closed on Monday, up 3.4%, moving just past Microsoft, which is valued at $789 billion. Jeff Bezos, the online retail giant's founder, is now the world's wealthiest man. His net worth is $135 billion. He overtook Microsoft founder Bill Gates last year. Now, this is the first time that Amazon has actually been in the top spot. The share prices of US tech giants have been on a roller coaster in recent months on concerns about sales volumes in particular markets like China and trade tensions as well. Founded in 1994, Amazon started out as a niche second-hand bookseller, and then it rapidly became an online retailer of items ranging from fresh foods to electronics to clothes even. Trade talks between China and the US have entered their second day in Beijing. Washington's delegation is being led by the Deputy US Trade Representative, Jeffrey Garish. Now, the two sides are discussing how to implement the consensus reached by their respective leaders. last month. At the G20 summit in Argentina, Presidents Xi Jinping and Donald Trump agreed to a 90-day truce to seek a resolution. Since then, however, China has announced a 3-month suspension of tariff hikes on U.S. cars and auto parts. In return, the U.S. has postponed a tariff hike from 10% to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. New car technologies are striking a pose. They're coming to market in Las Vegas as the annual International Consumer Electronics Show, CES, is being held there. Let's take a sneak peek now at some of the tech that car companies have come up with. Song Yaotian has more on what's hot tonight.
Some Chinese companies specializing in making electric cars have brought their new products to the fair. In the coming years, smart cars can not only drive automatically, it can even get lunch for you.
Alexa works like this in your home already, and now it works in your Byton, perfectly integrated into the Byton Live ecosystem. This is a major step from the voice-activated infotainment systems in today's cars. Imagine the possibilities of taking voice recognition to this next level.
Byton is a Chinese electric car company based in Nanjing. It is one of over 1,000 Chinese companies attending the CES fair. Also at the fair, Toyota shows its latest autonomous research vehicle. It uses 2 semi-autonomous systems, which Toyota is currently developing, dubbing Guardian and Chauffeur. Guardian offers driver assistance technology such as emergency braking, cruise control, and lane keeping, while Chauffeur is being developed to become a fully autonomous system functioning without a driver.
The essence of Toyota Guardian is about amplifying rather than replacing human ability. It's like giving Dad his car keys back for a bit more time behind the wheel. Or even more importantly, it's about saving teenage lives where car crashes account for 30% of fatalities.
Hyundai is unveiling their revolutionary new vehicle concept, Elevate, through an animated video on stage at CES. David Byron is the industrial design manager at Sundberg Farah, the company that's been working on the Elevate concept with Hyundai for almost 3 years, calls it the ultimate mobility vehicle.
A vehicle with legs could drive first responders to a location like any traditional vehicle, but then walk or climb over treacherous terrain to directly reach the injured or stranded like you saw in the video.
With its long, robotic legs, the Elevate is designed to drive, walk, or climb the most treacherous terrain, which normal vehicles can't access.
I like to imagine that one day, we'll send crewed missions to the moon or Mars, and when that day happens, the Elevate will be a fantastic way to send a whole new generation of explorers to do science and discovering those places.
Song Yaotian, CGTN.
And you certainly can expect a lot more content from CES on this program. Now, quick run through commodity prices here for you. Tanzania is the 4th largest producer of gold. There we go. Of gold on this continent. The country's named a new mining minister, Dr. Biteko. Now, he's been deputy mining minister since January last year, but also importantly, he led the probe that arrived at a conclusion that there was widespread tax evasion and smuggling in the gemstone